A group of astronauts who are stationed on the International Space Station make a startling discovery when they come across an extraterrestrial life form. However, the life form turns out to be more intelligent and hazardous than they had anticipated. A unmanned Pilgrim 7 space probe is returning from Mars to the ISS with a soil sample that could contain proof of alien life. Unfortunately, the probe encounters an asteroid field and suffers significant damage. The 6 crew members then aboard the International Space Station, ISS, and are to successfully capture a space probe returning from Mars carrying a soil sample that may hold evidence of extraterrestrial life. The team comprises 6 members, including exobiologist Ted Derry, engineer Rory Adams, and mission commander Katerina Golovkina. Upon examining the soil sample, Derry manages to revive a dormant cell, which rapidly develops into a multi-celled organism, and is named Calvin by a high school child. However, things take a turn for the worse when an accident in the laboratory renders Calvin inactive. To revive the organism, Derry administers mild electric shocks, but this unexpectedly triggers a hostile response from Calvin. Calvin attacks Derry, causing severe damage to his hand. While Derry is unconscious, Calvin manages to break free from its immediate confinement using the electric shock device. Now unleashed within the laboratory, Calvin consumes a laboratory rat by absorbing it, resulting in its growth and size. Engineer Rory Adams enters the room to rescue Derry, but Calvin latches onto Rory's leg. Despite Rory's attempts to fend off Calvin using a flamethrower, the organism enters his mouth and kills him by devouring his internal organs. Calvin emerges from Rory's mouth even larger than before and escapes through a fire control vent. The crew soon realizes that their discovery of extraterrestrial life may not be the groundbreaking achievement they had hoped for. Instead, it may lead to their own demise if they cannot find a way to contain and neutralize Calvin before it's too late. To make matters worse, the communications system overheats, causing the team to lose contact with Earth. Mission Commander Katerina Golovkina embarks on a spacewalk to rectify the issue. Despite the crew's best efforts to contain Calvin, the creature manages to breach the cooling systems and launches a ferocious attack on Katerina outside the ISS. In the process, Calvin ruptures her spacesuit's coolant system, leading to the release of toxic liquid into her helmet. Despite her struggles to return to the safety of the ISS, Katerina eventually realizes that Calvin would also be able to enter the space station. Refusing to open the airlock for help and preventing David from doing so as well, Katerina keeps Calvin outside the station. Tragically, this leads to her drowning in her spacesuit, and her lifeless body drifts away into the depths of space. Calvin persistently tries to infiltrate the station through the thrusters, and the crew endeavors to employ the thrusters to block Calvin's access points. However, their efforts prove futile, resulting in the excessive loss of fuel. As a consequence, the ISS begins to enter a decaying orbit, which will eventually lead to the station burning up upon re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. Pilot Sho Murakami notifies the crew that they must utilize the remaining fuel to establish a safe orbit. However, this action would allow Calvin to re-enter the station. In light of this situation, the crew devises a plan to render Calvin dormant. They decide to seal themselves inside one module while venting the atmosphere from the rest of the station. As Calvin succumbs to cardiac arrest, the crew makes a startling discovery. Calvin has been nourishing itself by feeding off Hugh's leg. Having transformed into a larger creature with tentacles, Calvin launches a vicious attack on the remaining crew members. In a desperate bid for survival, Sho barricades himself inside a sleeping pod, while Calvin relentlessly tries to shatter the glass and consume him. Meanwhile, David and quarantined Officer Miranda North devise a plan to use Hugh's lifeless body as bait, drawing Calvin away from Sho and trapping it within a module to deprive it of oxygen. Prior to the communication system's damage on the ISS, Earth receives a distress signal and dispatches a Soyuz capsule as a contingency measure to propel the station into deep space. The capsule successfully docks with the station and initiates the process of pushing it away from Earth. Mistakenly believing it to be a rescue mission, Sho exits his pod in haste and rushes to board the incoming ship, forcibly opening the hatch. However, this action triggers an attack from Calvin. Calvin suddenly latches onto Sho's leg, climbing up towards Miranda. Sho tries to grab Calvin, but the force of the station's decompression causes him to get sucked into space. Meanwhile, Calvin manages to cling onto the station. David helps Miranda climb up and locks Calvin out of the station. However, the chaos causes the station to start falling apart, and debris starts flying everywhere. David realizes that they only have 30 minutes before the station re-enters the Earth's atmosphere, and with depleting oxygen, he comes up with a plan. Since Calvin is searching for oxygen, they could use the oxygen candles to lure it. David plans to lure Calvin to one of the escape pods and launch himself into deep space with Calvin. Miranda would take a different pod and land back on Earth to tell everyone what happened. In a black box recording, Miranda narrates what happened and recommends treating all Martian life as hostile. David carefully traverses the station, and Calvin shows up and hugs his oxygen candle. David flees and uses another oxygen candle to lure Calvin towards the escape pod. Calvin rushes in and hugs David, and Miranda launches her pod. David launches his pod, and they start separating. However, both pods run into debris and begin malfunctioning. Calvin grabs David's arm, and Miranda's pod's navigation system malfunctions, causing the two pods to drift farther apart. David screams in agony as Calvin wraps around his arm, and one pod crash lands in the ocean. Fishermen approach the pod, unknowingly bringing themselves closer to their doom. The fishermen work together to open the pod and find David covered in tendrils of flesh. Despite David's attempts to discourage them from opening, but they cannot understand him. Despite David's attempts to discourage them, they open the door. Meanwhile, Miranda is lost in space. The film then cuts to black, leaving the audience to wonder what will happen next. The ending of Life is open to interpretation. Some viewers believe that Calvin will use David as a host to spread to Earth, while others believe that Calvin will simply be contained. Comments what you guys think would happen. For more, please don't forget to like and subscribe.